Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we will be taking a look at the Rice Owls, who finished 6-7 last season. They capped off their year with an appearance in the First Responder Bowl. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 13th. Today, we have a special guest joining us today. It is the number one source for Rice athletic news. It is The Roost, and he is Matthew Bartlett, the owner and editor of The Roost. The Roost can be found at The Roost on X. Welcome to the show, Matthew.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
We're glad to have you on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and our listeners and what led you to creating The Roost?
I've been in college football media and sports media for a while, working for some other folks, and lived in Houston, been in Houston more or less my whole life, and knew some guys at Rice, just kind of got my foot in the door and kind of set up shop. So I guess I'm going into, this will be year 7 as basically the primary beat writer for the team, and coinciding with when Mike Bloomgren arrived on campus. So it's been an interesting ride. It's been fun. It's been better the last couple years than the beginning, but thus is the nature of building up from scratch. So I guess the Roost has grown with the Rice Owls, which has been pretty fun.
Let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that's the quarterback. Last year's starter, JT Daniels, is gone, but they have several guys in that room who return, most notably A.J. Padgett. However, they also dipped their talents into the portal and brought in E.J. Warner from Temple. Would you say it's appropriate to call it a quarterback battle, or can we assume that this is E.J. Warner's job?
The official company line is no starter has been named. But I'm telling you guys right now, E.J. Warner's the starting quarterback, bar none. That's the answer. They didn't bring this guy in, son of NFL legend Kurt Warner, to ride the bench. Nobody gets promised anything in this program, but E.J. had the better spring. He's proven it at the American Conference level, back-to-back years leading the league in passing. Which you look at the quarterbacks that have been in this year, the past couple of years, like there's been some really like NFL caliber guys that he's outthrown. So E.J. Warner will be the starting quarterback for Rice football.
You know, Warner last season missed some games with injuries and stuff. Did he look fully healthy in the spring?
Yeah, I mean, he looked right. No worse for wear. Everybody was kind of getting used to the offense, but no injury concerns whatsoever.
Moving over to the running game, they lost one of their 1-2 punch to graduation, Juma Ottaviano, but their leading running back returns from a year ago, Dean Connors. Do we expect them to continue using a 2-back rotation, or do we see Connors tote the rock even more in 2024?
So if you go back to Mike Bloomgren's days when he was the offensive coordinator with Andrew Luck at Stanford, he had a bell cow for most of the years where he was running that offense. Well, he had Christian McCaffrey there. So we kind of, other than the Christian McCaffrey experience, it's kind of been a couple of guys. And if you look at Dean Connors, he is not, your 250-pound bruiser that is going to take 100 hits. He's kind of the guy that he's best when you can get him in space. And he's probably the best athlete they have on the field. So they're going to get him involved a lot, but I don't think you're going to see him in between the tackles 20 plays a game. That's just not where he's utilized best. So they are going to kind of spell him at times and kind of utilize a couple other guys in that room. It was kind of a 1-2 punch with Juma last year, a fifth-year senior, an experienced guy who had a 230-yard rushing game as a freshman. But I don't know if that other guy is there quite yet. So I think it's probably going to be 70-30 Dean and then mixing in a couple other guys as well.
Can we expect Dalen Alexander continue his role of that goal line back in 2024?
I mean, the only reason he lost it is he got hurt. You go into going into week 5 of the season last year, he led the nation in touchdowns. He had like 8 touchdowns in 4.5 games or something before he got hurt. It was insane. And we've seen, Rice has utilized kind of a goal line back at that position. It was Ari Broussard before him. Emmanuel Supka had some goal line stuff. You just keep going back. So, yeah, they'll utilize a guy they trust at the goal line. Dean, because Dalen's still working back, wasn't fully healthy in the spring. Dean did that in the spring. So he's more than capable. So they're not just going to pull him out to go put somebody else in. But I think, yeah, you get down and you find yourself in the red zone, you reset, bring out the jumbo package. Dalen will most likely be the guy who gets a lot of short yardage scores.
With a new quarterback in that system, Dean Connors was very involved last year in the passing game. Do you think that continues here in 2024, or that we might even see him more involved?
I think it has to, just because he's one of the best athletes on the field, and good coaches get the ball in the hands of your best athletes. And I know we'll talk about him in a little bit, but Luke McCaffrey no longer on this team. So that was your number one, target hog, the guy you want to get the ball to. If you look at guys who have proven it and done it, Dean Connors is one of the best receivers, pass catchers on this team right now. They have a bunch of young guys that they're really excited about that I think are obviously, as outside, inside receivers, going to get more targets, going to get more receptions downfield than Dean. But yeah, I think, what did he finish last year? Probably in the 20s, something of receptions. I would be surprised if you're not looking at like probably three a game, probably just to get him the football.
They bring in a really fast and exciting true freshman in Tajee Atkins. Do you think that they have some plays or packages just for him to utilize that outlet or that outstanding speed?
So Tajee's really interesting because, and you can actually go back to Dalen last year. I think everybody preaches that it's a meritocracy and the best man plays, but we've really seen Mike Bloomgren and OC Marcus Tuiasosopo stick to that in their time at Rice. So the only reason that Dalen got on the field at all last year is actually somebody got hurt in practice and he had to go in and the goal line package just at practice, and was so good at it, he kept the job. So with Tajee, like, the talent is absolutely there. Can he show it in practice, and can he prove that he belongs on the field? If he can do that, if you look at just who is the best pure rusher of the football on the team, he's a true freshman. He hasn't done it at the collegiate level, but Tajee has the ability to be special. He's a really, really good back, and the Rice staff is just giddy that they were able to get him on campus.
Did anyone else in that room stick out to you this spring?
They had a bunch of guys that were hurt. So Dean kind of shuffled in. He did a lot of it. There were probably, I'm just trying to think through. I don't know if anybody that got a lot of reps this spring is probably going to be a true traditional running back. Quentin Jackson is probably the guy who had the most highlight plays. I think he might have ended up leading the team in rushing in the spring game. He is kind of like a hybrid guy, can kind of catch the ball a little bit on the outside, kind of a speed option kind of guy. So he's quick. He proved he can run a little bit between the tackles, but on the smaller side. So I think he's a guy you'll probably see in the return game mixed in a little bit, and you'll probably see him here and there. But I don't think anybody from the spring, and this has kind of been the thing with Rice in the past, especially with the running back position, is they're going to trust their guys, the top ones. And for the most part, that's probably going to be Dean, Dalen, fingers crossed, maybe Tajee a little bit too.
Moving back to that passing game, as you mentioned earlier, that they lose NFL third-round wide receiver and all-conference first-teamer Luke McCaffrey, but they bring back just about everyone else. They also nabbed a couple transfers who have yet to make it on campus. How did the wide receivers look in the spring?
It was really interesting because you really got to see Luke McCaffrey just commanded the football. He was so good that you threw him the ball, and a bunch of other guys last year you saw at times had big plays, but it's different when you're the guy that is the guy. So that's really the only question that we weren't able to answer this spring, because you got to see it on Saturday, when the bullets are flying and somebody not wearing blue is trying to hit you. I think the two guys that are primed to take the next step, Ross and McNeil, he's going to kind of slot in as their primary outside X guy, a big, sturdy frame, had a couple highlight catches last year, has the potential playmaker. He's a redshirt sophomore at this point. So this will be fourth year on campus. So they're really excited about him. And then the other guy is Landon Ransom Goals, who actually started opening day against Texas as a true freshman. And that might not seem too notable maybe, but I'm racking my brain, and I asked head coach Mike Bloomgren this at the time. I said, and remember, this is a guy who coached Christian McCaffrey and a bunch of first-round tight ends at Stanford, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, like NFL caliber guys. I was like, when's the last time a true freshman started for you at a skill position? And he's like, man, I don't know. Like, so Landon got on the field game one and kind of separated himself. Kind of took him a couple weeks to get up to the speed of the college game. But you look at a guy who can play all over the field, shifty, really fast. He's probably the other guy. Him, Landon, and Rawson are the two that I think they're targeting for. If somebody is on campus that's going to step into that big role, it's going to be one of those two guys.
So you already mentioned Ransom and McNeil, but they also bring another exciting sophomore back in Braylon Walker. What can you tell us about him?
Braylon Walker is the guy that when he's had the chance to get on the field, he's been pretty productive. You look at, he came out at his redshirt season where they basically were so injury depleted that they put him out the last game of the season against North Texas to try and get to a bowl game. This would have been 2 seasons ago, and he had something like 100 all-purpose yards and a touchdown out of nowhere. Had a couple big plays in the bowl game, and nobody had heard of this guy. So he's shifty. He can play the slot. They really like his speed. For him, it's just been consistency. You talk about some of the guys in that room. Everybody's coming back. A bunch of veteran guys who do things the right way. And that's not to say he's not, but when you have such a logjam of guys in front of you, sometimes it's hard to get on the field. So I don't know how much snaps he's going to get when he does get on the field. They are going to try and get him the football a little bit because he can make some plays in space. He has pretty impressive acceleration.
Is there anyone else in that room that you think we should know about moving into 2024?
Those are the big guys. A guy that is probably 2 guys worth mentioning that I think are interesting. Matt Sykes is a transfer from UCLA, and the staff was really excited about him last year. Got hurt, banged up, and never just kind of really clicked. Rawson right now is the ex McNeil that they're going to slot in, but it's college football. Injuries happen. They're going to need somebody else. So he's the kind of guy that I'm not going to be stunned if we're in week 6 or 7 and he kind of takes charge. So we'll see. Could be nothing. Could kind of grow into a bigger role if he kind of established himself. He's one guy. And the other one is Kobe Campbell, who converted running back, came in and has kind of morphed into a slot receiver, has been there for the past couple years. He is the veteran man in the room right now. And he's kind of been, kind of that 3rd or 4th option for most of his collegiate career, caught a couple passes here and there. Kind of guy that you're looking through this roster of who can you just kind of send to maybe take the top off and kind of take a couple shots downfield. Wouldn't be surprised if he has a big touchdown grab or 2. Again, not a heavy target guy, might not get a ton of playing time as, the younger guys mature, but he's the kind of guy, especially early in the season, I think you could see a decent amount on the field.
If you were to describe the tight end usage for this offense to somebody who's never caught a game, how would you describe it?
It's the NFL. This is a pro style offense. You go look at the list of guys that, have come from Stanford. Zach Ertz, probably the big one, that have just kind of flourished in the NFL and had big years. They came under Mike Bloomgren at Stanford, and he just kind of set up shop and brought it here. So if you look at one in college football, you're not going to see a bunch of tight ends, and the ones you have are going to be either pure blockers or kind of that, we stick him on the line, but he's really our 5th receiver. You're going to have guys in this offense that do it all, that play in all formations, that know the entire offense, or run blockers and pass catchers. So they're going to be heavily involved. And we've seen, Jack Briley is a guy who was there for years, did pretty well. Jager Bull did a lot of good things in the run game that have been through here in this offense. And now we got the next guy coming up in Bowden Groen that is probably the best pass catcher out of all of those combined, is kind of taken the leap from the JUCO ranks a couple years ago and really established himself. So this is an offense that's going to use the tight end and use it heavily.
So if I'm going to read between the lines here, we got EJ Warner coming over from Temple. He targeted the tight ends frequently at Temple. We've got Groen, who returns, and he was the 2nd on the team in routes run last year and 3rd in receiving. What are we looking like here in 2024 when those 2 combine?
Well, and the crazy thing is Groen wasn't the starter. He was the backup to Jack Bradley until probably game 9 or 10, when Bradley got hurt and Groen became the starter the rest of the way. I mean, he played a ton and he was their pass catching guy. So he was on the field a lot, obviously. But we're looking at an even bigger role. And especially when you're looking at the guys behind him, they got a couple D2, D3 transfers, some freshmen that are coming along that might have more specialized roles. But if you look at a guy who's going to be on the field every single play, just about, it's going to be Bowden Groen. So, yeah, I mean, you talk about a red zone safety blanket, and you talk about a guy who's more athletic over the middle field than some of those linebackers he's going to be matched up against. Yeah, I mean, it's a recipe for what could be a really special season for Bowden Groen.
Moving over to the offensive line, they lose starting left tackle Clay Servin, but they brought in a few transfers like Chad Lindbergh from Georgia and Spencer Cassell from Harvard. Rice has to be excited about the other offensive linemen that are returning. What can you tell us about how those guys looked in the spring?
It was pretty exciting, not because we got any real clarity. I think the last couple springs here, it's been saying, okay, who can we find 5 guys that can play these positions? And this year truly was the first year where it's like, well, shoot, they have 10, maybe 11 guys. It's who are we going to put on the field? I mean, you lose Clay Servin, and that's a big piece, but Ethan Oniana is a guy that, like, people around the program and NFL scouts have come to go check out, and he's going to move from right tackle to left tackle. They're really excited about him. You bring back Braden Nutter at center, and then you have a bunch of guys that you could plug in. Brant Banks, another all-conference, AAC all-conference guy going into the season that you're going to put down at the other tackle. And then you're choosing between, a Georgia transfer. You're choosing between guys that have started, 30, 40 collegiate games at the D1 level to plug in at your guard spot. So right now we're just kind of sorting through is like, I don't even know if I could tell you for certain who's going to line up those guard spots, but this is the deepest this roster has been in a long time up front, which is pretty exciting, especially we talk about Dean Connors in the running game. Music to his ears, I'm sure.
If you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, Matt, who are you picking?
I think Dean Connors is not allowed. I think if you follow allowed. Rice, well, if you follow Rice football, Dean Connors having a breakout season shouldn't surprise you. If you do not follow Rice football and you have not heard of Dean Connors' name, you will know who he is. So that's the shoe-in answer. If we're just talking that a guy in large who's going to become a national name, it's Dean Connors, absolutely. But if you're looking for maybe a guy under the radar that might not have come into his own yet, I'm going to go Rawson McNeil, because you got a good quarterback, a really good quarterback. He's going to need a go-to wide receiver. And man, they like those big body guys that can go up and get it. And that's Rawson. So if he can put it all together, I think you're looking at a guy who can become, that alpha in the offense. They need somebody to step up. It might be him.
All right, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. And there's a lot to be excited about. First, let's talk about the guys up front along the defensive line. They did lose an important piece up front with DeBraylon Carroll going to Texas Tech. But other than that, this group mainly stays intact from a year ago. How did they look in the spring, and did anyone stand out?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at a defense that returns 20 of 22 on the 2 deep, which is crazy. Bill Connolly does the SP Plus returning production. Rice has the most returning production of any team in the country on defense coming into the 2024 season. So that's a pretty good start. Losing DeBraylon Carroll stinks. I always made the joke that if he was 2 inches taller coming out of high school, he would have been playing at Texas Tech. And if he was 3 inches taller, he would have been playing at Texas. Dude is unreal. So it's going to stink having him. Isaiah Floyd is a big guy in the middle. He's going to play a lot of snaps. He was already on the field a lot. The guy that you're actually going to see on the field more, probably taking his spot, Blake Banish, who made some starts at times. DeBraylon Carroll got hurt, missed a good chunk of 2 seasons ago. He was the guy who kind of took that next step, and he's been a monster in the middle as well. So you see a lot more of Blake Banish. And I think the interior is going to be, that's kind of, if I'm looking at question marks for this team, that's kind of what I want to see as we kind of go through, fall camp and into, next couple weeks. Cause Joseph Mutombo is a guy who I guess redshirt freshman, huge monster dude, was an all district guy in high school and looked really good in the spring. They like him. Michael Larby is a guy who came in from Duke, got some snaps last year. So somebody else is going to kind of have to step up. I'm not sure who that's going to be, but if you look at the top two between Banish and Isaiah Floyd, that's as stout of an interior starting tandem as you're going to get in the American.
The linebacking group looks strong going into the 2024 season as well. Highlighting this room is the return of their leading tackler from a year ago in Myron Morrison. What can we expect from this group in 2024?
It's probably the deepest group on the team, if I'm being honest. Chris Conti starting linebacker last year for half the season before he got hurt. I don't know if he's going to crack the two deep, which is crazy, and not for lack of talent. Like, when you can replace a starter because the rest of the guys are that good, that kind of speaks to where you are. So yeah, Myron Morrison, straw that stirs the drink. He's going to be on the field, calling the shots on defense. The guy I'd point out probably is Ty Morris, who has just become kind of a superstar, a sponge, kind of soaked up. True freshman last year. Like I mentioned, hard to get on the field as a true freshman on this team. It just doesn't happen very often. But whenever he was on the field, he made plays. And so he had a really good spring. Coaches had a lot of good things to say about him, trusted him to do more, put more responsibilities on his plate. So he's a guy, either him, DJ Arkansas, those two are kind of the guys who, when you just look at just pure athleticism and athletic ability, they don't look like linebackers, man. They play like they're so much bigger and faster. So those two guys I'm really excited about. I think you kind of see a rotation between them and Myron. And man, Bo Barton probably had the best spring of any player on this roster. And I don't know how you get him on the field. That's probably a special teams guy. But there's just so many options in this room that, for the most part, and it's been tricky because this offense kind of deploys kind of a modified 4-2-5, ish at times. So they're only putting two linebackers on the field ever. So this might be the year where, say, man, can we squeeze off one of those tackles and put in an extra linebacker? I think there's a possibility that DC Brian Smith is more willing to do that this year than he has in years past, just because this room is so good.
Moving over to the defensive backfield, they did lose a key piece when Trayshawn DeVones left for Duke, but overall the room has experience coming back with guys like Play Wyatt, Gabriel Taylor, and Sean Fresh, among others. What can we expect from the defensive backs here in 2024?
I'm really interested because this is a part where they have the top line is really, really good. Like Gabe Taylor, brother Sean Taylor, has just been a superstar. He's been everything you ever thought he would be. The only reason he ends up on this roster is because he didn't decide he was going to play football until his senior year of high school. Everybody had already filled up by the time he was out there and had 7 or 8 pick sixes in his senior year, his first year playing football. He's silly. He's been that good at Rice. So he's a sure thing, lock and loaded. Sean Fresh kind of turned himself into really a lockdown corner last year. Trayshawn DeVones, him leaving, that's the biggest hit. Max Ahoya is a guy who has taken over, and he has been the guy who, I went into the spring uncertain. I said, who's going to fill that role? And, I talked about O-line where they just kind of cycled through just a bunch of different guys. And that's not what they did at corner. They basically put Ahoya on the other side and said, hey, it's yours. And he was there. He was the starting corner all through spring. I don't think that guarantees him anything, but man, he's the front runner right now. I think the only other guy that I would put into that conversation right now is Fabian Marks. He committed after spring. He's a transfer from Utah, started some games, played a lot of snaps with the Utes over the past couple years. And so, but I think that's probably, if we're looking at position battles to watch going into fall camp, I think it's going to be Marks or Ahoya. Somebody is going to win that role. And in years past, they've really liked to not rotate. those positions. They like to put their corners on islands and say, hey, you stand there unless you really need a break. So one of those two guys, I think, gets the lion's shares of the snap. So they can stay healthy. I think they're really good. The only other guy that I did wanted to make sure I hit on, because we talk about superstars in the making, I think Tyson Flowers has the potential to be the best defensive back on this team. And he is a sophomore, just kind of coming into his own, really kind of took that position by storm last year and became kind of that field general, backing up a lot of guys. So he's made some big plays. I think we got more out of him. I just like his twitch, and he just seems to find the football. Those are kind of the guys you want in the defensive backfield. So they got pieces. It's going to be all about putting those together and making it make sense.
Well, if you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, is Tyson the guy, or is there somebody else?
Again, I'll go. We haven't mentioned him yet because he's not really. He's an in between. But Josh Piercy is the guy. This is my Dean Connors pick. Okay, if you haven't been following Rice football, Josh Piercy is a guy who is going to hear his name called in the NFL draft next year. He is super talented, kind of an edge hybrid linebacker that's kind of stood up this spring and gone transition to more like that outside linebacker role. So you look at a guy who's going to be, first team all conference by the end of the year and, making some noise. The guy you see on SportsCenter, it's probably going to be Josh Piercy. But you go in a guy who's going to kind of rise through the ranks. I'll go Ty Morris, but Tyson Flowers is my number two. Is that cheating? Can I give you three guys?
You can give as many as you want, but
one of them's going to get mad at me when I see him next. Hey, why didn't you just say me? And I'm like, I'm getting there. Damone Green, defensive end. We didn't talk about the edges. I will say Coleman Coco is a guy who transferred in and was an absolute game wrecker last year. So you want to talk about reasons I'm most excited about the defense? It's the guys who can rush the passer off the edge. That's something Rice has kind of struggled with the past couple of years. But you put Coleman Coco and Josh Piercy on those edges, and that's probably what I'm most excited about this defense going into the fall.
Awesome. Now with spring practice over, which position group or groups do you feel is the most concerning?
I'm going to say corner, and that's just because of the way that Rice defensive coordinator Brian Smith wants to scheme this defense. He wants to put his corners on an island by themselves and say, hey, you win. And then if he can do that, the rest of the defense works. We saw that last year with Devones and Fresh. When you can't get over the top on the outside and you got to get forced guys in the middle, it gums up the opposing offenses really, really well. If Rice doesn't have that guy, that true lockdown number two, I think it kind of changes how you got to set up this defense and how you're going to orchestrate it and how much trust and leeway you get. I think Smith is going to be as aggressive as he can and stick with that, just put you on an island for as long as he can. But if there's no true number two that steps up, I think things get interesting. So concern, it's just because I've never seen that second guy, whether it's a Hoya or Marks or, they have some younger guys too. I've never seen that second guy do it at Rice. I've seen flashes here and there in practice, but man, we've all seen so many guys ball out in practice and then the lights come on Saturday and it's a different game. So I think corner on defense, that's probably my most concern, and not even just from a lack of talent, just because I haven't seen it. And I've seen it. I think I've seen it everywhere else, which just goes to show how good this roster is right now.
The transfer portal is certainly winding down, but do you think, is there any particular position the Rice staff may be looking at in the portal still, or?
I think if you want one more guy, it's interior defensive tackle. They have put some feelers out. They had one guy that looked for a brief moment like he was coming here, ended up at Illinois, which was a bummer. But I think that's the one position that you kind of like another guy, especially if you can get somebody from the portal, a veteran guy to kind of plug and play. But I think for the most part, it's tricky because you're this late in the cycle and there's not a lot out there, man. Like you're not going to find another offensive lineman that you want to put on the field.
D-tackles and offensive linemen, like
yeah.
If you do find them, like they've been in pretty high demand and command a pretty good price too, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not much there. So the guys that you're going right now, and Rice has done a pretty good job of finding those second year, third year kind of guys that have multiple years of eligibility left and have kind of done stuff. So I think that's what you saw. We didn't touch on him a lot, but Ty Chicago Bowman from Florida, that was one where we went down the receiver roster and we're like, they're good. You don't need any more receivers. Like, you have so many guys, but there are guys you make exceptions for. You talking about a guy who was a top 20 JUCO prospect in the nation a couple years ago before he ended up at Florida. So yeah, I think that this is a staff that has put together, I think 4 of the top 5 recruiting classes in program history in the last 4 seasons, which is pretty good. So yeah, if there's guys out there, they're going to find them. But I think at Right Point, this is kind of like, maybe you find 1 or 2 guy that can play, but I think you kind of roll with what you got, as we go into the summer.
So we got a lot of strengths that we've kind of named for Rice. They got a lot of guys coming back. What do you think is the main strength of this team in 2024?
I think it's the continuity. I think that it's been really interesting. Like I said, I've been here. This is year 7 for Mike Bloomgren, and I've sat in his office and we've talked about like when I get my scheme in place, when I get all my players here. You're looking at his 3rd year in a row with both coordinators intact. You got the highest amount of returning production in the American Conference, top 15 in the nation. You have a quarterback who is, we use new in air quotes, but is one of the best in this conference. Everything is just kind of stacked together. And the guys who have been there, they all know the system. So it was fun talking with him in the spring. And he was like, man, we're not teaching X's and O's anymore. Like, we did that 2 years ago. Now we're talking about finer, nuances and details of footwork and where you put your hands and going into the nitty gritty. So I think that the biggest strength they have is that there's not many new faces, and the guys that they're bringing back, they were really good last year. So like, returning production is great. Like, I've seen a lot of Rice teams that have a lot of guys coming back who, weren't good. These guys were all good last year, and so they're building on it. So the biggest strength is that, this was a team that was 6-6 last year with a bunch of these same guys. Now these same guys are bigger, faster, stronger, better. It bodes really well for this season.
When it comes to recruitment of new players and retention of existing players, how has the NIL and transfer portal impacted Rice?
I think it's been a net positive for sure. You look at this roster, like we've talked about it. It's the most consistent roster in the American. I went through, and I think there was over 100 guys who were on the field for Rice, at least in practice last fall. They're still here. Like, you look at the extremes, like Colorado, that have turned over their entire roster, in a year. USF, a bunch of guys that have just churn, brought in a lot. And I'm not saying that's not it works for some people, but you look at Rice, like, they've been able to recruit high caliber guys like Luke McCaffrey, who we talked about, just got drafted, was a transfer. EJ Warner was a transfer. Dean Connors was a transfer. All these guys that could have gone anywhere and had offers from, especially McCaffrey, like Power 5 schools to start and play, and ended up at Rice. So they've gotten talent. And yeah, you've lost guys. We talked about DeBraylon Carroll and Trayshawn DeVos. Those are 2 guys they'd rather have back. But man, when you're losing 1 or 2 starters a year to the portal that are going on to play at, P5 programs, and you're getting 2, 3, 4 guys that can play meaningful snaps for you, it's been an absolute net win for Rice.
It seems more and more with the demands of the head coach are really turning into more of a general manager type role between recruiting incoming freshmen, your player retention, fundraising, and maybe moving away from less of the X's and O's role. Do you see that happening at Rice?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. And I think I owe a lot of credit to Mike Bloomgren and the administration as well, because I think this is really interesting, because almost by happenstance, Mike Bloomgren is one of the longest tenured head coaches in FBS football. He's going into year 7, and you look at guys that have been at a school for 7 years in 2024, like, the list keeps getting shorter and shorter. Like, you get 3 or 4 years to prove it And if you don't, you're out. And so the fact that Bloomgren had so many years to kind of learn on the job, I think one of the things that he did so well last year and the year before when he brought in Tuiasosopo, from the West Coast, a Pac-12 guy, is he's given him more and more of the offense and more control. And we've kind of seen as Rice's offensive numbers have continued to get better, it's been a lot of Bloomgren saying, hey, I can't, call every play. I can't be here in the nitty gritty and all the game plan development. I have to cede some of that responsibility. Now he's still actively involved. He's the head coach. This is his baby, right? But yeah, the willingness to trust more people, I think that's been the biggest difference between the Mike Bloomgren in 2024 and the guy who got here in 2018. The guy who got here in 2018, would not be successful this year. But the guy who's here in 2024, I think he's learned a lot and he's had time, which is a pretty rarity in college football today.
All right, the 2024 season is over. You're looking back upon it, Matt. What has to happen for you to say, hey, this season was a success?
Well, a bowl game is a minimum. That's just bar none. And you're talking, look, there's 3 guys in the history of Rice football that have gone to back-to-back bowl seasons. 3 head coaches. This is a program that's playing football for 116 years or something like that. So if Mike Bloom can make it 3 in a row, especially 2 in a row with 6 wins, he's become, in rarefied air of things that just don't happen at this university. It's hard to win football games at Rice, with the academic challenges and other things they got going for them. So that's one. But really, this is a year you kind of put all the pieces together. You talk about the roster that you have coming back. You believe in the quarterback. You believe in the talent on both sides of the ball. Nobody is going to pick Rice to be a contender in the American because they're Rice. But man, if you really want people to feel good about this season, this is one of those years. If you talk about a program like Rice, there are going to be some programs that, your Ohio State is you win 11 games every year, period, the end. But there's other programs, especially in the group of 5, is like, hey, you're going to have years where all of the cards come together. And there's a lot of people around South Maine that think this could be the year, and I have a hard time arguing with them. So I think if you get to 6 wins at the end of the year, people are going to be happy. That's the expectation. But this kind of really feels like the potential to be an inflection point for this program. So I think people around here are kind of hoping that this is a squad that can contend in the AAC. Remember, you have no SMU this year. So it's Memphis, Tulane, and UTSA hitting a big reset. So those are all still really good football programs. I get why all those programs are going to be picked ahead of Rice in the standings. But when you look at things that Rice is lacking, it's a short list. So yeah, I think success, at least 6 games, but I think there's a lot of folks that think this should be an 8 or 9 win team and be in that conversation come November.
I think Luke and I both agree with you. We were just talking last night about how Rice is kind of a dark horse candidate, if you will, to compete for that American title.
Yeah, because you're talking about UTSA, no Frank Harris. That's different. You've got Tulane, pretty much a whole new team. On paper, it looks really good, but paper doesn't always translate to what's there on the field. Then you got Army coming in. That'll be new, right? And then, Memphis will be solid. UAB, Trent Dilfer, that team be pretty good. You got Tulsa's kind of this up and coming. They're kind of, they could win a couple games here and there. But yeah, the AAC kind of looks a little bit different this year in comparison to other years.
Yeah, and you look last year, and remember, this is a Rice team that people expected nothing from. They were in a 1-possession game in the final minute with Tulane and SMU. And SMU, they were playing with a backup quarterback. So, it only counts if you win the games. I get that. But these were games where Rice was a 22-point dog. And they were trading punches with the best this league has to offer. So you got to win them. Close doesn't count. But, man, if I'm not going to be shocked, especially you have a reloading UTSA, Rice wins that game and you go in and you beat Tulane, you're in the mix. Like, that's all it would take. And those are really good football teams. I get why Rice is probably going to be an underdog in both games, but this roster is really good and it's all intact. Those are 2 teams that are hitting a lot of reset buttons early in the season, which it's hard to do in college football. Reload is something that only few head coaches can do really successfully, consistently.
All right, Matt, is there anything else that you want to share with us or think that we should know about this 2024 Rice Owls football team?
I think they're going to be interesting, man. I think they're going to be fun. Especially you look at, this is a team that won the Bayou Bucket last year, beat Houston, ended up getting Dana Holgerson fired. That was an exciting start to the season. And, Willie Fritz, formerly of Tulane, is now at Houston. So I think Houston might be a tougher out this year than they were last year. But this is a Rice team that I think that with injuries and just some unfortunate luck, we haven't really seen at full strength. So yeah, I think this is a team that, and here's the thing, you can go back, check the tape. You look at, what I was talking about this team 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when they were bad. I'm not a Rice alum. Like I have no vested interest in, I'm just going to call it like I see it. And this is the best team that they've ever had under Mike Bloomgren. Like when they were bad, I was going to say they're going to be bad. I think they're going to be pretty good. So yeah, if you want very fun football to watch on Saturdays, now that thank goodness we're in the American and everything's on ESPN Plus, tune in, because I think you could see some fun. That Memphis game is on a Friday night. Could get interesting. They'll score some points, and I think the defense is going to be pretty salty too.
Well, Matthew, thank you again for sharing your time and knowledge with us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me.
If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you are listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. Until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.